Hey, project based. Tennyson here. Um, so one thing that we're supposed to be doing is doing some pre-recorded lessons for every class, which I'm doing obviously for like the sophomores and juniors, but with the seniors it's a little different because we don't have normal class anyway. And so I've been asking the virtual students that were there on Wednesday and then the in-person students, like, what do you think would make good content to share with you all that you would actually maybe be interested in watching? And one that everyone kind of agreed was a good idea was to post some videos of me learning something new in computer science. And part of that's, to take away the impression that maybe I've got it all figured out. And I know you guys have seen me struggle with stuff before, but for the most part, that's not the case. Like most time, I'm the teacher. I'm like the expert in the room, and you're learning from me. And you don't really get to see like how much I struggle all the time, which I do a lot. And I think that's maybe a good thing for you all to see before you go to college. Like you're about to struggle again, and that might seem just like you're tired of being on that treadmill, but all of life, if you're doing it right, has elements of struggle to it. And it also has elements of like feeling like an imposter sometimes. And that's actually why I re-recorded this intro, because originally I had made one. I realized it wasn't really on the mark for what I wanted to say. And so, there's one fail. I redid this. But I'm going to make some videos about me learning something new. But I decided as like a little bit of a confidence builder, which we all need, I would go and do some really pretty straightforward problems on 8-bit and do like a speed run of coding, just to kind of get warmed up. But 8-bit doesn't work anymore unless you like subscribe to it, so that sucks. And then what was funny is I went on CodeWars and I made a new account, I smurfed it, and I put it on 8Q problems, and some of the problems caught me off guard. And so with like what I had to think about, I really expected to go through each one in less than 30 seconds, and some of them took me 10 minutes, maybe even more. So I wanted to share that with you, and I wanted to put that in the intro to say, like, even I went out and thought, okay, I'm going to solve these really fast, it'll build my confidence, and then I'm sitting there struggling like, okay, now I feel like an imposter. But I'm not, right? And neither are you at your level where you are right now. You're not an imposter. You are where you are. You're good thinkers. You all are. You're experienced computer science students. You all are. And that's something you should be confident about and proud of. So we're going to do the speedrun video, and then I'll decide what I want to learn, and we'll do that video probably after this one, but this will be your first one. So I hope you like it. I'm going to kind of narrate some of the problems and talk about my thoughts as I look at them. I'll probably speed it up some too, so you're not just like staring at me, stare at the screen. All right, that's the end of this intro. All right, well, this is the second voiceover recording because apparently Apple voice memos don't save anywhere, which is super cool after you've recorded 5 minutes of your own voice. All right, here's the first speedrun problem. This one immediately caused me to lose confidence because I don't know why it took me so long. Probably because I'm really out of shape when it comes to coding. But anyway, this is called the pre-FizzBuzz workout on CodeWars. It's an 8Q problem, and it's a it's a prelude to FizzBuzz, which is like a little more complicated classical CS problem. Pretty sure it's like uses even or modulo or something to find even numbers. I can't remember exactly what FizzBuzz is, but you can go out and look for it and solve it yourself if you want. Anyway, this one took me longer than expected. So basically what you're doing is you get a positive integer. You're supposed to create an array or a list up to that integer with 1 included in the beginning. So it starts at 1, goes up to n, including n. So we're going to try to create that output, and you're going to watch me struggle to do that at first. And then I finally just decided to use a while loop, even though it's kind of old and busted looking. It works. Spoiler alert. The first thing I do is I try a list comprehension, which makes sense to me in this case, just to use a range and try to make a list this way, but it ends up not working the way I expect it to. And I'm not really sure why this happens, but it doesn't work, so I move on and try something a little bit different. This one passed the first test just because it creates that list with just one integer in it. I'm still not sure why it just repeats the numbers, because if we create an equivalent for loop, which you'll see me do here, it goes from 0 up to 2, so I'm really not sure, but obviously got something wrong here. It could be because I'm using range in a list comprehension, and that might create some kind of weird behavior. I go to my iTerm to check it out in vanilla Python. Technically, I think this should be the same as the list comprehension, but it's obviously not, so I don't know what I'm talking about. I end up abandoning this idea entirely. I end up tinkering with this for loop for a while before I remember that the much more straightforward way to solve this problem is just to use a while loop. And you got to return your solutions. Easy fix. So that one definitely caught me off guard, but I figured it out. And then we'll look at the more elegant solution that someone else submitted. And we'll remember that for next time. All right, so this is a classic problem that you have seen before. It's asking us to swap the values inside of a list. And you may remember that in order to swap values using variables, we typically need a temporary variable, but Python actually has a little trick that lets us swap variables without using a temporary variable. And I try to use that here, and then it doesn't work, and I'm wondering what the heck's going on. And so you're going to watch me fumble around a lot with this one, which is fun. I'm pretty bamboozled here because I think that this should absolutely work, and you may have already figured out my problem. For some reason I do this. Because this isn't working, I decided to go with the classic method. It's a good fallback. It's always better to write simple code that works than complex code that does not work. And here I realize my problem is that I wasn't supposed to be returning anything ever. I was just supposed to be fixing the existing code. And so at this point I realize I can write my original code that I had before and solve the problem a little quicker. Okay, this is the first problem where I saw it and thought, how is this an 8Q problem? This looks complicated. I honestly thought about skipping this problem, but I wanted you to see me struggle through it for sure because I didn't even know if I could do it without spending a ton of time on it. I eventually figured it out. It's not perfect, but I was happy that I decided to do it and stuck with it until I got finished, because there were a couple times where I thought I should just give up on this because I feel like a total fraud right now, but I eventually worked it out, and yeah, so here we go. So the gist of the problem is that you are creating sublists within a new list that contain chunks of the original list, and they're chunked out based on n, which is that second argument. But you should include the preceding value from the first chunk in the next chunk. And so it's a little weird the way that this works. But anytime we think about chunking out something, whether it's a string or a list, a lot of times we can use slices. You're going to see me use that here. And again, like, this was a very intimidating problem to me. I didn't get it at first at all. And then I finally figure out how to do it in my way, and we'll see a more elegant solution in the end. So at this point, I feel like I know that I can use a slice because I see that my output looks kind of like what I want to get, but it just gets more complicated from here. I'll pause here and talk about enumerate for a second. If you don't know what enumerate is, basically it allows you to take an iterable, like a string or a list, and separate the index and the element at the same time. So when you see me type 4 underscore comma I in enumerate LST, I've actually kind of got those switched up. I should put I in the underscores position just because I represents index. But anyway, what happens is that that underscore, when you loop over, it's going to pull out the index from that element, and I, in this case, again, I've got it backwards, but I is going to represent the element. So it's a way of accessing both the index and the element at the same time, which can be really useful. That way you don't have to write a bunch of extra loops to get that information. So I'm using it here to try to chunk out my list and keep track of what index I'm on so I can track that, that number that I need. Here I realize I'm getting closer, but there's still lots of problems with my code. I'm not sure, and at this point, again, this is one of those moments where I'm like, I think I'm going to give up because I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But I keep going. So at this point, I'm not sure how to do the math correctly. Like, I don't understand what I need to do mathematically to keep this sort of last weird element off of my list. You can see that in some cases I'm almost exactly right, but I've got this little extra bit. And I'm not sure how to get rid of that. So what I end up doing is I know that each chunk should not be less than or greater than n in length. So if, for example, if n is 2, every chunk should be of length 2. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to write a filter to remove from my list any chunk that is larger or smaller than n. In the end, I just decide to say I'm going to filter out anything that doesn't equal the n value, or the length of the element doesn't equal the n value. And LE is just short for element. Now I say this is busted because I was feeling bad that I didn't figure it out probably quote-unquote the right way, but you guys remember I've told you many times, if the code works, it works. I would probably at this point, I'd go and ask a more experienced developer, how would you do this? And they would see, oh, you've got a solution, but it's a little inelegant. Let me show you a more elegant solution. And that person that tells me that would be someone like the person who wrote the best solution or the most upvoted solution on the next page. So these 20 people, right, were able to solve the problem a little bit more succinctly than I was, but you should ask yourself, is the code any easier to read? Remember, Python is not meant to be like a super fast, low-level language that runs on microwave computers. It's built to run on big computers with lots of power. This operation that we did with our inelegant code isn't that much more expensive, and it's also perhaps more readable than that first solution. So readability typically trumps performance in the modern era. Something to keep in mind, but I still wish I could have written a more elegant solution. I still felt that way at the end, and that's okay. Okay, this problem is one I actually remember doing before, and it's one of my favorite because I really don't like geese. They poop everywhere and they're aggravating. One attacked us at the zoo last Sunday, and I almost had to roundhouse it even though it's a protected creature. Don't come near my kids, geese. All right, let's watch this one. One of my favorite things about Python is you can write code like this a lot of times. We want the birds for every bird in birds if the bird is not a goose. That's the code. Super duper. I'm starting to have more fun at this point because these problems are super easy. Python has a built-in function that lets us use range, or build a range. That's called the range function, and it just so happens to include optional arguments for the min, the max, and the step. So I'll just do that right now. First, I've got to convert it to a list. I actually remembered that from that problem I struggled with earlier. So there's a good example of why you should always pay attention to the best solutions. You might learn something new or remember something you've forgotten. The grammar on this one's a little busted, but if we read it closely, we can realize what it wants us to do is if we run into an alligator, we're supposed to return that our frog has a small mouth, and if it's not an alligator, we'll return a wide mouth. And I don't understand the premise of the problem at all, but we do it anyway, so here we go. You're going to see me write a little if-else shorthand here. When we write simple if-else expressions, we can use this shorthand so we don't have a bunch of blocks of code. Sometimes it makes the code a little easier to read. I like to use it when it's a short if-else. So we're mostly right, but we forgot one detail in our problem, and that's what I get for reading the problem quickly and not thoroughly. Right? This is another pretty straightforward problem. We're just trying to count the number of times that true appears in this list. And at first, I try to think of some very clever way to do it. Then I just rely on the count method, and I Google it to make sure I'm using the syntax correctly. Okay, and this is the last problem. So with this one, I thought again that I could be clever. See, my confidence was just flying through the air, or flying through the ceiling maybe, and my ego had grown at this point. So I was like, oh, I'm going to be really clever with my solution to this. So I try a few different things, but I settle on the most straightforward solution, which ends up being correct. Sometimes the right thing to do is the simplest thing to do. This is another example of some shorthand with if statements. The way you read this is if 1 is less than or equal to month, which is also less than or equal to 3, return 1. So you're basically doing the same thing as an and, it's just a little bit shorter. I say there's got to be a better way. Is there really? Well, that's the most upvoted solution. The best practices, it says 95 people upvoted that as best practice, which is very similar to what I wrote. It's just using range to do the same thing. But you see, there are a couple of other solutions which use some math, like this ceiling of month with division or float division by 3. I was looking for something like that, trying to figure out. I just didn't figure it out. And it's cool to see people make those clever solutions and just acknowledge that they were clever, and hope that someday you can figure out how to be just as clever and also get upvoted so you can get internet points. Yeah, so that's the end of the speed run. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that first video. It was supposed to be a speed run. It turned out not to be in a lot of ways, and I thought that was good because really this is supposed to be about me learning. And as you can see, even the simple stuff that maybe you knew and I didn't know as you were watching that video, we forget, right? And it's okay that we forget, even though sometimes we feel like it's not okay, which I did. Like while I was recording the video, I was like, oh, I can't believe I don't know this. But that voice is not your friend. So don't listen to it. Listen to the voice that encourages you and reminds you that you do know what you're doing And with persistence and a little bit of Googling, you can do just about anything with code. All right, cool. I'll see you for the next video. Thanks for watching.